The courtroom held its breath, a fragile silence stretched taut by a contempt fine that hung heavy in the air. But in that charged space, something unexpected was about to unfold, a testament to the quiet power of unwavering conviction. This is the story of Jasmine Crockett, a lawyer who understood that true strength in the face of injustice doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply presents the unshakable truth. He slammed her with a contempt fine right in front of everyone, but what Jasmine Crockett said next flipped the entire courtroom and left the judge speechless. The courtroom, normally a place of rigid formality and hushed whispers, was warmer than usual that day. Not oppressively hot, but warm enough to make people shift uncomfortably in their seats, tug at their collars, and surreptitiously fan themselves with legal documents. A subtle tension permeated the air, a sense of anticipation that hung heavy, making even the most seasoned legal professionals feel a prickle of unease. Something about the atmosphere made you want to clear your throat, even if you had nothing to say, a collective nervous tick in the face of the unfolding drama. Jasmine Crockett stood at the defense table, a picture of composure amidst the simmering tension. One hand rested lightly on a stack of meticulously organized folders, each one a testament to her thorough preparation, while the other remained at her side, calm and steady. Her gray slacks, tailored to perfection, were devoid of a single wrinkle and not a bead of sweat-marred her brow, despite the stifling heat. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, never left Judge Randall Forrester's, their gaze a silent challenge, a declaration of her unwavering resolve. The moment he raised his voice, the room tensed, the collective breath held in anticipation of the clash to come. "Miss Crockett," he said, his tone rigid, the words clipped and precise. "This court does not entertain political speeches disguised as legal arguments. You've been warned once. If you continue down this path, I will find you in contempt." She didn't flinch, not even a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. "Your Honor, with all due respect," she replied, her voice calm and measured, yet imbued with an underlying steeliness. "This isn't politics, it's precedent, and I'm asking this court to recognize the difference." Forrester leaned back in his chair, his lips pressed into a thin, tight line, a mask of barely concealed irritation. He was a man known for two things: his short patience and his long memory, a judge who brooked no dissent and held grudges with a tenacity that bordered on legendary. He eyed her like someone who'd just been told their favorite rule was being bent, his gaze a silent reprimand. "You've been practicing law long enough to know better," he said, his voice laced with a hint of condescension. $500, contempt of court. The fine hit the room like a physical blow, a sharp, resounding slap that echoed through the silent courtroom. A few gasps rippled through the gallery, some murmurs of disbelief, but Jasmine didn't move, her composure unwavering. The bailiff, a man accustomed to the theatrics of the courtroom, scribbled dutifully on a notepad, while the court clerk paused, glanced up with a mixture of surprise and apprehension, then quickly averted her gaze. A young law student in the back, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief, whispered to his friend, "Did she just get fined for citing case law?" Jasmine cleared her throat calmly, the sound amplified in the hushed room. "Then I respectfully request the court's rationale for the fine, so it may be reviewed as part of the appellate record." Forrester blinked, momentarily taken aback by her audacity. He wasn't used to being questioned, at least not like this, not with such calm, unwavering resolve. From the lofty perch of the bench, he could usually smell fear, the subtle scent of intimidation that emanated from those who stood before him. But Jasmine wasn't afraid. Her tone was measured, her eyes focused, her voice steady, each word a carefully placed brick in the wall of her argument. "Excuse me," he said, more a challenge than a question, his voice laced with incredulity. "You find me for contempt," she replied, her voice still calm, still measured. "I'm asking for the court's reasoning, so it can be entered into the record, should it be necessary for review." He shifted in his chair, the leather creaking softly in the silence. You could almost hear the tension hum in the air, a palpable energy that crackled between them. A few feet away, the prosecutor, Leland Briggs, a by-the-book type who prided himself on his adherence to legal procedure, flipped through his own notes with theatrical slowness, as if to say, "Not my problem," his eyes fixed on the pages, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. He didn't look up. "You're bordering on disrespect," the judge warned, his voice low and menacing. "And you're bordering on suppressing a valid defense." Jasmine shot back, her voice still calm, still measured, yet with an edge that cut through the silence like a sharpened blade. "I'm not raising my voice. I'm not making speeches. I'm quoting federal case law and asking the court to hear the facts. If that's contempt, then we've all lost something bigger than $500. Someone exhaled loudly in the gallery, a nervous laugh that quickly died in the oppressive silence. Judge Forrester stared at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowed, his expression unreadable. His mouth moved like he was about to speak, then stopped, the words caught in his throat. "Move on," he said finally, his voice tight with suppressed anger, "before I make it $1,000. But that didn't stop the shift in the room, because something had happened. She hadn't shouted, she hadn't backed down, and somehow, without raising her voice, she made everyone sit up, made them pay attention. The judge looked irritated, but also slightly unsure, a rare moment when someone in authority feels a crack forming under their feet and isn't quite sure if it's coming from their own misstep or the person standing in front of them. But before he could regain control of the room, Jasmine turned the page, and what came next was going to rattle more than just the courtroom silence. 2 days earlier, Jasmine sat in a modest corner office on the second floor of a law firm in downtown Dallas. Not one of those glass towers with fancy views and espresso machines, just a beige building with creaky floors and file cabinets that still use keys, a place where legal battles were fought with grit and determination, not flashy presentations. She was on the phone, pacing slowly in flats that had seen more courtroom floors than fashion runways, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Who's the arresting officer?" she asked, her pen tapping rhythmically against her notepad. "Officer Trent Walsh," came the voice on the other end, a weary-sounding paralegal. "Pulled 6 protesters out of a sedan outside the Northern Star Oil building. Charged them with unlawful assembly and trespassing." "Were they violent?" "Nope. One of them was a high school teacher. The rest were in their 20s. They were reading statements out loud, sitting on the steps." Jasmine stopped pacing, her eyes narrowing. "Reading statements?" "Yeah, the whole thing's on video. A guy live-streamed it on Facebook." She ran her hand down her face, a gesture of weariness mixed with determination. She'd seen this pattern before. Corporate building, private security gets nervous, calls the police, charges get thrown on the books to scare people into staying quiet, to silence dissent. But this one felt sloppy, rushed, a blatant disregard for due process. "I'll take it," she said, her voice firm. "You sure no one else touched it?" "They're calling it a waste of court time." "They've said that before," the paralegal replied, a hint of resignation in their voice. By the end of that day, she had 6 case files spread out across her desk, each protester charged the same way, same arrest report copy-pasted with different names, no statement from the actual building staff, just a rushed affidavit and a few grainy screenshots. But one detail stuck out, a glaring inconsistency that screamed of injustice. Officer Walsh claimed he gave 3 loud verbal warnings before making arrests. On the video, though, he barely got through the first warning before yanking someone to their feet. That someone, Marissa Elkins, local art teacher, wore cat-eye glasses and carried a sketch pad in her purse. On video, she doesn't even look up before Walsh's hand grabs her wrist, the force of the arrest sending her glasses askew. Jasmine leaned back in her chair. The video paused on her screen. The image of Marissa's startled face burned into her mind. She knew this case wouldn't make headlines, wouldn't garner national attention, but it mattered, not just because people were arrested for sitting and speaking, but because the system was counting on no one paying attention, counting on the silent acquiescence of those who were too afraid or too powerless to fight back. That's why she didn't hesitate to step into the courtroom this morning, to challenge the judge, to demand justice. She'd done her research, pulled city ordinances, dug up 2 federal cases that matched the situation almost to the letter, cases that spoke of the fundamental right to peaceful assembly. But what she hadn't counted on was Judge Forrester. He wasn't just strict, he was dismissive, the kind who believed protests were loud nonsense, a nuisance to be swept under the rug, and thought civil rights arguments belonged in dusty textbooks, not active courtrooms. Before proceedings began, he barely looked at her, barely acknowledged her clients, his eyes filled with a dismissive weariness. When she introduced herself, he muttered, "We'll keep this quick," the word quick, heavy with unspoken meaning. Quiet, don't make a scene, don't waste my time. Jasmine never made scenes. She made arguments, solid, irrefutable arguments. At the defense table that morning, her clients sat beside her, a motley crew of ordinary people caught in the gears of an extraordinary injustice. Marissa, the art teacher with her cat-eye glasses and quiet dignity. Two college students, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and defiance. A postal worker, his uniform a symbol of his everyday heroism. And a community gardener named Daryl. His heart condition a constant reminder of his vulnerability, his struggle to stand for what he believed in. Jasmine glanced down the row, her heart aching for their plight. None of them looked dangerous. None of them looked like criminals. They looked tired, anxious, like people who'd been told that speaking up could cost them. And maybe it could, but not if she had anything to say about it. "Stay calm. I'll speak for us," she whispered, her voice a soothing balm in the midst of their fear. Marissa squeezed her hand under the table, her touch a silent expression of gratitude. "You always do," she whispered back, her voice thick with emotion. But Jasmine wasn't just there to speak. She was there to dismantle every false charge, to expose the injustice that lay beneath the surface. And by the time she was done, even the judge would have to listen, would have to acknowledge the truth. By the time court resumed that afternoon, the energy in the room had changed, a subtle shift in the balance of power. It wasn't dramatic, no fireworks or grand pronouncements, just a quiet intensity that permeated the air. People leaned forward instead of back, their eyes fixed on Jasmine, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. They weren't there for fireworks. They were waiting to see what Jasmine would do next, what quiet storm she would unleash. Judge Forrester entered with the same stiff posture and pursed lips as always, his face a mask of judicial authority. But his eyes briefly flicked toward her. Just a flick, quick, almost imperceptible, but there a silent acknowledgement of the challenge she had posed. Jasmine stood before the bench, her notes in one hand, her other resting lightly on the table, her stance calm and confident. Her voice didn't need volume. It had weight, the weight of truth and conviction. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and resonant. "We're not here to dispute property boundaries or vandalism." My clients sat on concrete steps. They read statements. There was no force, no damage. They didn't even block access to the building. They were arrested because someone didn't like what they were saying. Forrester cut her off, his voice sharp and impatient. "Ms. Crockett, we are not here to retry the arresting officer's discretion. You are here to argue the merits of the motion to dismiss." "I am, Your Honor," she said, still calm, still measured. "And the merits are rooted in the First Amendment, reinforced by Martin versus City of Stroud, and, more recently, Holder versus Community Network." His eyes narrowed, a flicker of irritation in their depths. That last case, Holder, was obscure, barely cited. Most attorneys didn't even reference it because it came from an appellate ruling in Indiana, a state far removed from the Texas courtroom. But Jasmine had found a key overlap, a crucial precedent that spoke directly to the heart of the matter. "Your point?" he asked, voice low and dangerous. In Holder, the court ruled that protesters arrested outside a private office building could not be charged with trespass when the building operated on publicly accessible grounds. Same setup here. The front steps of Northern Star's headquarters are not gated. They're open to pedestrian traffic and business visitors. The judge sat back, folding his arms across his chest, his expression skeptical. "So now we're applying rulings from Indiana?" She nodded, her eyes unwavering. "Not applying, drawing a parallel. Because when states start to mirror each other in how they respond to peaceful assembly, It becomes a pattern worth acknowledging, a pattern that speaks to the erosion of fundamental rights. The prosecutor, Leland Briggs, sighed loudly, a theatrical display of exasperation. "Your Honor, this is a stretch. These people broke the law, plain and simple." Jasmine turned to face him, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "Mr. Briggs, did you watch the video footage of the arrests?" He shifted in place, his gaze avoiding hers. "The department provided incident reports. So you haven't seen the video? That's not relevant." "Respectfully, it is," she said, her voice firm and unwavering, "because the arrest report says Officer Walsh issued 3 warnings. The video shows him barely giving one before grabbing Miss Elkins by the arm. No crowd control order, no PA system, just his voice in a noisy street, and even that he didn't wait to finish." Forrester flipped through the paperwork in front of him, but stopped midway, his eyes lingering on one document longer than the others. "Officer Walsh is not present for testimony today," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. "No, sir," Jasmine answered. "The department said he's on leave, stress-related." Briggs cut in, his voice defensive. "He's a decorated officer, and he made an error." Jasmine interrupted, her voice still even, still measured. "But this isn't about blaming him. It's about correcting the result of that error, about ensuring that justice is served, regardless of the officer's intentions." For a split second, the room was still again, the silence broken only by the soft whir of the air conditioning. Forrester exhaled slowly through his nose, his face unreadable. His face didn't change, but the delay said more than his expression ever could. He was processing it, weighing the evidence, considering the implications. He wasn't agreeing, not yet, but he was listening, truly listening. Briggs tried one more jab, his voice laced with desperation. "She's turning this into a political sideshow." Jasmine didn't even look at him, her attention fixed on the judge. "This isn't a show. This is my clients' lives. They were threatened with criminal records over a silent protest on open steps. If that's the system working, then we need to ask who it's working for and who it's failing." The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It was uncomfortable, a palpable tension that hung heavy in the air. Forrester glanced back at the fine he'd issued earlier that morning, his expression a mixture of irritation and dawning realization. You could tell he was beginning to realize it wasn't just excessive, it was reactive, an attempt to silence her, to intimidate her. But what he didn't know yet was that Jasmine hadn't even played her strongest card. Not yet. Jasmine flipped to the final page of her notes, her fingers barely touching the paper, but her voice carried every ounce of weight it needed. "There's one more case I'd like to introduce into the record," she said, scanning the courtroom without raising her voice, her eyes meeting the judges. "Donovan versus Metro PD, 9th Circuit, 2016. Judge Forrester raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "That was dismissed on procedural grounds." "It was," Jasmine nodded, her voice calm and steady. But the language used by the appellate court in their opinion established a standard, one that aligns with what happened here, a standard that speaks to the importance of protecting peaceful protest. Briggs scoffed, his voice laced with derision, now reciting case language from a case that didn't even proceed. "It's not the outcome I'm citing," she said, turning toward him calmly, her eyes unwavering. "It's the court's interpretation of how officers handle protests on publicly accessible private property. The court warned against vague orders and reactive policing, which, Your Honor, is exactly what Officer Walsh did." Forrester leaned forward, elbows on the bench, suddenly more alert, his skepticism replaced by a flicker of interest. "You're telling me a single paragraph in a dismissed case should override current Texas law?" "No," she said, her voice firm and resolute. "I'm telling you that the law isn't just about punishment. It's about protection. And when we let weak cases slide by with a rubber stamp, we normalize sloppy arrests. Then suddenly anyone standing outside with a sign becomes a criminal, even if they're reading from a notebook quietly on a public sidewalk." Briggs folded his arms, his expression a mask of frustration. He was losing the thread, and he knew it. But Jasmine kept going, her voice gaining momentum, her words resonating with the weight of truth. She walked slowly toward the front of the room, stopping just short of the jury box, her eyes fixed on the judge. My client Daryl has heart problems. He sat down to protest because standing too long could send him back to the ER. He said nothing, made no threats. The officer didn't ask questions, just grabbed him. Same with Marissa, dragged by her wrist like she was resisting. She wasn't. She was reading a quote from Dr. King when he pulled her up. She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. Your Honor, I know this courtroom has seen worse crimes. I know there are bigger cases. But if the justice system can't take these small moments seriously, moments where people are punished simply for being visible, then what's the point of any of this? It was quiet again, but not awkward, not tense. More like everyone was recalibrating, shifting their perspective, seeing the case in a new light. Judge Forrester looked down, his eyes fixed on the arrest reports, his expression thoughtful. He thumbed through the pages once more, his fingers lingering on one name. Marissa Elkins, he said, his voice low and contemplative. She stood, nervous, her voice small and trembling. Yes, sir. You're the one who was reading from a book when you were arrested? Yes, sir. From a collection of speeches. I didn't move when he spoke because I didn't hear him clearly. It was loud on the street. Forrester turned back to Jasmine, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and dawning realization. You say this is all on video? Yes, sir. We've submitted the footage and time-stamped Officer Walsh's commands versus the physical arrests. You'll see he begins grabbing protesters 4 seconds after his warning. No loudspeaker, no second chance. Forrester sat back again, expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. The room watched him, not the video, their breath held in anticipation. And then he looked at Jasmine, his eyes filled with a quiet respect. And you're requesting dismissal of all 6 charges? I am, on grounds of unlawful arrest, suppression of free speech, and misuse of police authority. My clients exercised a constitutional right in a public-facing space and were penalized because it made someone uncomfortable. The judge didn't speak, his eyes fixed on the folder in front of him. He stared at the documents, his expression thoughtful. And for a moment, Jasmine could see it, the flicker, not quite regret, but reconsideration, like he just realized the ground he thought was solid had a crack running straight through it. He reached for his gavel, but didn't bring it down, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom. Instead, he looked straight at her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. I'll take the motion under advisement. She nodded once, respectfully, her expression calm and composed. No smile, no sigh of relief, just stillness, a quiet confidence in the power of truth. Briggs didn't say a word, neither did the clerk. But the room felt different now, not just because of what had been said, but because no one was looking at Jasmine like she was the problem anymore, like she was the one disrupting the order of things. But just when things seemed to settle, Judge Forrester opened the file one last time, his eyes scanning the pages, and what he read next changed everything, shattering the carefully constructed illusion of justice. Judge Forrester flipped through the folder with mechanical precision, page after page of arrest reports, witness statements, and supporting documents, his eyes scanning the text with a practiced efficiency. Then, without warning, he paused, his brow furrowed, his expression a mask of confusion. It was a small detail, buried in the back, an affidavit signed by a building security manager from Northern Star, a seemingly insignificant piece of paper that held the key to unlocking the truth. Jasmine had read it already, twice, her eyes meticulously analyzing every word, every nuance. She knew what was coming, the revelation that would shatter the prosecution's case. This statement, Forrester said slowly, lifting the page with 2 fingers, his voice laced with incredulity. This came from the property manager? Yes, Your Honor, Jasmine replied, her voice calm and steady. His name is Gerard Blanche. He signed the affidavit the morning after the arrests. Did you submit this? No, it was submitted by the prosecution. Briggs blinked, his face flushing crimson. Yes, it came with the initial packet from the department. Forrester began reading aloud, his voice flat and emotionless, yet each word resonating with the weight of damning evidence. At the time of the protest, the building entrances were not obstructed, and no physical damage was observed. Protesters remained seated on the front steps and did not interfere with foot traffic or business operations. Police were not requested by property management, but appeared after a phone call from a private tenant on the 5th floor. He stopped, his eyes fixed on Briggs, his expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. The courtroom was still, the silence broken only by the soft whir of the air conditioning. Then he read it again, slower, emphasizing each word. Police were not requested by property management. Briggs shifted in his seat, his face a mask of desperation. Your Honor, that doesn't mean the protest was legal. No, Forrester said, his voice sharper now, the veneer of judicial impartiality cracking. But it does mean the arresting officer didn't have direction from the building's ownership or management, which raises a question. Why did he escalate so quickly? He looked at Jasmine, and for the first time since the trial began, his gaze didn't hold annoyance. It held curiosity, a genuine desire to understand. She didn't press, didn't seize the opportunity to score a cheap point. She let the silence sit, allowing the weight of the revelation to sink in. Then he turned to Briggs again, his voice laced with suspicion. Did you question Officer Walsh about this? I know, sir. I relied on the arrest reports, which contradicts this statement. Briggs's mouth opened, then closed again, the words caught in his throat. Forrester turned to the bailiff, his voice firm and decisive. Pull up the video on the evidence monitor. A few taps later, the footage played, the grainy images flickering on the screen. It was shaky but clear enough, the sound of cars passing, a few voices in the background, the cacophony of urban life. Then Officer Walsh steps in a frame, speaking with what sounds like urgency, but without a megaphone or microphone, his voice barely audible above the ambient noise. You could hear Marissa's voice clear as day, her words ringing out with the power of conviction. And that's why the voices of the people must not be ignored. Then his hand grabs her, the sudden violence of the arrest jarring against the backdrop of peaceful protest. Another protester stands in shock, his face a mask of disbelief. He's pulled up next, his hands cuffed behind his back. No second warning, no opportunity to comply. Forrester leaned back again, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on the screen. The room watched him, not the video, their breath held in anticipation. And then he looked at Jasmine, his eyes filled with a quiet respect. You wrote a memo on Holder versus Community Network in law school. He blinked, his voice laced with surprise. Yes. How do you know that? He held up the same affidavit, flipped to the back, his eyes scanning the text. Gerard Blanche mentioned your name, he said. You represented a tenant of his in a discrimination claim 7 years ago. Said you dismantled their argument in court without ever raising your voice. The courtroom suddenly felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken tension. Didn't mention that, he said, his voice laced with suspicion. Why? I didn't think it was relevant. He studied her face for a long moment, his eyes searching for any hint of deception. You know the law, he said, his voice laced with grudging admiration, and you know how to apply it without theater. That's rare. Then he turned to Briggs, his voice firm and decisive. I'm dismissing the charges, all 6, based on insufficient grounds for arrest and failure to meet the burden of proof regarding unlawful assembly. Bang! The gavel hit the wood, the sound echoing through the silent courtroom. Gasps, a few stunned glances, the collective breath released in a wave of relief. Darrell put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with emotion. Marissa let out a quiet laugh that turned into a sob, her tears a testament to the injustice she had endured. Jasmine just stood there, eyes locked on the bench, like she wasn't finished, like there was still more to be said. Forrester cleared his throat, the sound amplified in the hushed room. As for the earlier fine for contempt, I'm striking it from the record. Silence again, the weight of the judge's admission hanging heavy in the air. "You've made your point, Miss Crockett." She looked him in the eye, her voice calm and unwavering. "I wasn't trying to." He nodded, barely, almost like it hurt, his pride wounded by the revelation of his own error. But before the courtroom emptied, one final conversation was waiting outside those double doors, and it wouldn't come from the judge, but from the people whose lives had been irrevocably changed. The wooden doors swung open, and the courtroom emptied slowly, like people weren't quite ready to return to the real world, to the chaos and injustice that lay beyond those walls. Jasmine walked out last, her folder tucked under one arm, her expression calm and composed. She didn't speak, not yet. Her clients surrounded her, quietly relieved, overwhelmed, a little stunned by the turn of events. The hallway outside was narrow, the kind of corridor where fluorescent lights buzz faintly overhead and every footstep echoes too long, a stark contrast to the grandeur of the courtroom. Darryl leaned against the wall, hand on his chest, not from strain, just catching his breath, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved us," he whispered. "I really thought I was going to walk out of there with a record for sitting down, for speaking my mind." "You didn't break the law," Jasmine said, her voice firm and resolute. "You made someone uncomfortable. There's a difference." Marissa stepped forward, her voice still catching on a sob, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you stay so calm in there? When he find you, when he interrupted you, I would have lost it." Jasmine smiled a little, a hint of weariness in her eyes. "You can't fight fire with noise. Judges don't listen to anger. They listen to structure. They listen to certainty. I knew what I had, and I trusted it." "But he was ready to dismiss you," Marissa said, her voice laced with disbelief. "He treated you like you were wasting his time." Jasmine looked past her, toward the courtroom doors, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "He didn't see me as a lawyer, not at first. Just another voice in the crowd, talking too much. So I gave him something he couldn't argue with, the law. No attitude, no performance, just facts lined up like dominoes." The young law student who'd been in the back earlier approached, nervous, his eyes filled with admiration. "Excuse me, Miss Crockett." "Yes." He looked almost embarrassed, his cheeks flushed crimson. "I've read your name before, in a dissent you filed 2 years ago on that housing case. I'm at UNT Law. Thank you. That was incredible in there." She softened, her expression a mixture of humility and encouragement. "It's not about being incredible. It's about being consistent. You show up prepared, even when no one thinks you should. Especially then." Behind her, footsteps approached, deliberate, slow, the sound echoing through the hallway. Jasmine turned, and there stood Judge Forrester. No robe now, just a shirt and tie, jacket slung over one arm. His expression a mixture of humility and grudging respect. He was still a man who valued control, but he was also a man who had been forced to confront his own fallibility. "I had forgotten about that housing case," he said, his voice laced with a hint of self-deprecation, "until I saw your name again." Jasmine stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on his. "You argued a rent control loophole in front of Judge Lassiter, didn't you?" "I did." "You won." She gave a small nod, her expression calm and composed. He exhaled through his nose, a gesture of resignation. "Your style isn't loud, but it lingers. I remember now." Jasmine didn't smile, didn't revel in her victory. That wasn't the goal. The goal was to make it fair, to ensure that justice prevailed. Forrester studied her, his eyes filled with a quiet intensity. "Years ago, I used to teach procedural law. I told my students, don't get too creative with civil rights arguments. The court doesn't care about poetry." She raised an eyebrow, her expression a silent challenge. "Do you still believe that?" A pause, the weight of his unspoken admission hanging heavy in the air. "I'm starting to believe it matters who delivers it." That hung there for a beat, a moment of unspoken understanding, a recognition of the power of truth, delivered with intelligence and unwavering calm. Then he offered something unexpected, a gesture of respect that transcended the adversarial nature of their relationship. "If you ever consider taking the bench, you be good at it." Jasmine's eyes didn't move, her expression unwavering. I'm not done with this part yet. He nodded once, a gesture of understanding. Fair enough. And with that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway, a symbol of the shifting power dynamics in the courtroom. Daryl looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and gratitude. You gonna take that as a win? She let out a slow breath, her expression thoughtful. No, just a start. But the story wasn't over yet, not until someone younger, watching from the sidelines, understood what they'd just seen, understood the power of quiet conviction. Later that evening, Jasmine sat outside a small cafe off Swiss Avenue, the late sun painting long shadows across the pavement, the city lights twinkling in the distance. For the first time all day, she looked like she could breathe, the tension finally easing from her shoulders. Her blazer was folded neatly beside her. A glass of iced tea sat untouched on the table, the ice melting slowly in the warm evening air. Across from her sat Nico, a first-year law intern, barely 2 months into the job, still carrying more questions than answers, his eyes wide with the weight of what he had witnessed. He had followed her from the courthouse without saying a word, his notebook clutched tightly in his hand. And now his notebook was open, but his pen wasn't moving, the words caught in the whirlwind of his thoughts. I don't get it, he finally said, his voice laced with confusion. You could have snapped back when he fined you, when he dismissed you. Why didn't you? She smiled without humor, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. Because the moment I make it personal, I lose control of the conversation. But it was personal, he insisted, his voice laced with indignation. He disrespected you. He undermined you. Jasmine stirred the ice in her glass, still not drinking, her eyes fixed on the swirling liquid. Yeah, it was personal, but justice doesn't care how you feel. It only listens when you speak its language. He tried to box me in, so I gave him something he couldn't throw out, a legal wall with no cracks. But he wanted to discredit you, Nico said, his voice laced with disbelief. You saw it. I see it all the time. That silenced him, the weight of her experience hanging heavy in the air. She leaned in slightly, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. You ever seen someone try to lift a weight they weren't trained for? They strain, they panic, they drop it. That's what it feels like when people try to carry the burden of injustice without the right tools. He stared at her, his eyes wide with the dawning realization. That courtroom wasn't about showing off, she continued, her voice firm and resolute. It was about giving the law its proper shape. That judge had a hammer in his hand, and he thought I was the nail. But the thing is, hammers don't work on steel. Nico's eyes widened a little, his expression a mixture of awe and understanding. So you came in prepared, he said. I came in solid, she replied, her voice filled with a quiet confidence. Because sometimes you don't get second chances. You get one shot to make people see they're wrong. And if you waste it yelling, they'll only remember the noise. He looked down at his notebook, his pen still poised above the blank page. I want to be that good one day. You will, she said, her voice filled with encouragement. But not if you're trying to be me. Be better than me. Study the law like it's a language you haven't learned yet. Learn every corner of it. And when the day comes that someone says you're out of line, you won't need to raise your voice. You'll just raise your evidence. For a moment, the table was quiet, the silence broken only by the soft hum of the city. Then he looked up again, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. Do you ever get tired of it? She finally took a sip of her tea, the cool liquid a welcome relief. All the time, she said, her voice laced with weariness. But I get more tired of seeing people lose because no one showed up. Across the street, 2 teenage girls passed by, holding signs from the protest, their faces filled with a quiet determination. One sign read, "We have the right to speak." The other, "We're not going away." Nico noticed them too, his eyes filled with a dawning understanding. They don't even know what you just did for them, he said, his voice laced with awe. They don't need to, she said, her voice calm and resolute. They just need to know someone fought for the rules to protect them. That's enough. She stood, gathering her things, her expression a mixture of determination and quiet satisfaction. One day, she said, her eyes fixed on his. Someone's going to look at you in court the way you looked at me today, and they're going to remember what fairness sounds like. Don't take that lightly. He nodded, silent again, eyes heavy with the weight of what he'd seen, the lessons learned. As Jasmine walked away, the sun dipped behind the edge of the buildings, and her shadow followed, just behind, quiet, steady, certain. Because sometimes the strongest voices don't need to echo. They just need to last, to endure, to stand as a testament to the power of truth. Jasmine Crockett's courtroom battle, therefore, wasn't one with fiery rhetoric or dramatic outbursts. Instead, it was a masterclass in the strategic deployment of knowledge and unwavering composure. Her actions offer a powerful lesson, a blueprint for navigating the complexities of justice. Preparation is the ultimate weapon. Jasmine's deep understanding of the law, her meticulous research into obscure precedents, and her careful review of the evidence allowed her to dismantle the prosecution's case piece by piece. In any challenging situation, thorough preparation builds an unshakable foundation of confidence, a shield against intimidation and a sword against injustice. Furthermore, composure under pressure amplifies your message. Even when facing a contempt fine and a dismissive judge, Jasmine remained calm and measured, her demeanor a testament to her unwavering resolve. This not only preserved her own clarity of thought, but also forced the courtroom to listen more intently to her reasoned arguments. Emotional reactivity can often derail your message, while a steady demeanor commands respect, transforming your voice into a force that cannot be ignored. Additionally, the power of facts presented clearly. Jasmine didn't rely on emotional appeals or theatrical displays. Instead, she presented the facts of the case and the relevant legal precedents with precision, transforming complex legal arguments into a clear and compelling narrative. This methodical approach transformed a seemingly open and shut case into a clear demonstration of injustice, exposing the flaws in the system and demanding accountability. In any argument, well-organized and clearly articulated facts are often more persuasive than impassioned pleas, cutting through the noise and revealing the truth that lies beneath. Finally, true advocacy is about the cause, not the ego. Jasmine's focus remained squarely on her clients and the principle of free speech, her actions a testament to her unwavering commitment to justice. She didn't engage in personal attacks or seek to grandstand, her selfless dedication to the cause ultimately resonating more powerfully than any personal theatrics could have. Jasmine Crockett's victory, in conclusion, was a quiet revolution, a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes are brought about not by the loudest voices, but by the unwavering presentation of truth delivered with intelligence and unyielding calm. Her actions serve as a beacon, illuminating the path towards a more just and equitable society, where the power of truth prevails over the tyranny of injustice. The echoes of Jasmine Crockett's courtroom victory resonated far beyond the confines of that Texas courthouse, rippling outwards like the concentric circles formed by a stone dropped into a still pond. Her quiet revolution, a testament to the power of unwavering resolve and meticulous preparation, became a beacon of hope for those who sought justice in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a stark reminder that the law, at its core, was not merely a collection of dusty statutes and arcane procedures, but a living, breathing entity capable of being wielded as a shield against oppression and a sword against injustice. The young law student, Nico, carried the lessons he learned that day like precious cargo, his initial confusion replaced by a burning desire to emulate Jasmine's unwavering commitment to truth. He devoured legal texts with renewed fervor, dissecting case law with the precision of a surgeon, seeking to understand the intricate dance between precedent and interpretation. He practiced his oratory, not with theatrical flourishes, but with the quiet confidence that came from knowing the facts, the arguments, the very essence of the law. He understood now that true power in the courtroom lay not in the volume of one's voice, but in the weight of one's words. Meanwhile, Marissa, Daryl, and the other protesters, their lives irrevocably altered by Jasmine's intervention, became quiet champions of their own rights. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that their voices mattered, that they possessed the inherent right to challenge injustice, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. They organized community meetings, educating their neighbors about their constitutional rights, empowering them to stand up against unlawful arrests and the suppression of free speech. Their protest, once a small act of defiance, blossomed into a movement, a quiet uprising against the normalization of injustice. Judge Forrester, too, underwent a transformation, a subtle shift in his judicial philosophy. The encounter with Jasmine forced him to confront his own biases, his preconceived notions about the nature of justice. He began to scrutinize arrest reports with a more critical eye, demanding transparency and accountability from law enforcement. He recognized that his role was not merely to uphold the letter of the law, but to ensure that its spirit was upheld as well, that justice was served impartially, without regard to power or privilege. The story of Jasmine Crockett, the lawyer who spoke softly but carried the weight of justice, spread through the legal community, a whispered legend that inspired a new generation of advocates. It became a case study in law schools, a testament to the power of meticulous preparation and unwavering composure. Legal journals dissected her arguments, analyzing her strategic use of obscure precedents and her masterful cross-examination. Her name became synonymous with integrity, a symbol of the unwavering pursuit of truth. The impact of her victory extended beyond the courtroom, influencing public discourse on the delicate balance between public safety and civil liberties. Media outlets, once dismissive of the protesters' cause, now scrutinize police tactics and question the validity of arrests made during peaceful demonstrations. The public, once apathetic, began to demand greater accountability from law enforcement, recognizing that their rights, too, were at stake. The case also sparked a debate about the role of judges in upholding civil rights. Legal scholars argued that judges had a responsibility to ensure that the law was applied fairly and impartially, even when it meant challenging the actions of law enforcement. They pointed to Judge Forrester's initial dismissal of Jasmine's arguments as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of judicial bias. As the years passed, Jasmine Crockett continued to champion the cause of justice, her reputation growing with each hard-won victory. She became a mentor to young lawyers, instilling in them the importance of integrity, perseverance, and the unwavering pursuit of truth. She taught them that the law was not a weapon to be wielded for personal gain, but a tool to be used for the betterment of society. Her influence extended beyond the legal realm, inspiring activists, community leaders, and ordinary citizens to stand up for their rights. She became a symbol of hope for those who felt marginalized and disenfranchised, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, justice could prevail. The quiet revolution that began in a Texas courtroom spread throughout the nation, a testament to the power of one person's unwavering commitment to justice. It was a reminder that true change was not always brought about by grand pronouncements or violent uprisings, but by the quiet persistence of those who refused to be silenced. The story of Jasmine Crockett became a part of the American narrative, a reminder that the pursuit of justice was an ongoing struggle, a constant negotiation between the powerful and the powerless. It was a testament to the enduring power of the law, not as a static set of rules, but as a living instrument of change. And so, the echoes of Jasmine Crockett's quiet revolution continued to resonate, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the light of justice could still shine through, illuminating the path towards a more equitable and just society.